Uh, so welcome everyone to this event. I'm Anna, I'm with Live School. I'm a former educator myself, and I'm joined today with Jordan. Jordan, if you want to introduce yourself really quickly.
Sure. My name is Jordan. I was, until very recently, high school administrator. I was a dean of students, so I've probably had a similar job as a lot of you all. I was in charge of climate culture, mostly school discipline stuff. So happy to be here.
I will be moderating the chat as things are coming through, sharing those questions with Paul. But we're really excited for today's event. We're featuring Paul Kennedy, who's the Director of Student Achievement at Global Academies. And so today we're going to be focusing on how Global Academies define school culture through their behavior rubric. I'm really excited for today's event. It's amazing what Global Academies does. So Paul, without further ado, do you want to take it away?
First of all, I want to say good morning to everyone. My name is Paul Kennedy, and as you see on the screen, we're going to talk about how Global Academies define school culture through their rubric, through our behavior rubric. It says Global Academies made their school culture specific, measurable, and community driven by building it into their behavior rubric. And here's how. Our goals for the day. Today, we're going to have an understanding of the connections between school culture and student behavior and staff morale. I'm also going to try to provide a framework to articulate your school values through the 22-23 school year. I'm going to provide ways to measure your student behavior and conduct and strategies to foster buy-in from your staff. And we're just going to do this together because, like it was previously stated, all of us more or less serve children in the same manner. Who am I? My name is Paul Kennedy. Once again, I am Director of Student Advancement and Student Programs at Global Academies. And we are under the guise of the Office of Alumni and Student Programs. I am also the PBIS Coordinator, Positive Behavior Intervention and Supports. I have a Bachelor of Science that I achieved in the year 2000. I had two majors, pre-physical therapy and health and physical education with a teacher certification. I actually taught in the school district of Philadelphia, where I'm from, for 16 years before I moved to Global Academies. In 2005, I was fortunate enough to get my master's in education from a school called Gwinnett Mercy University, with a major in education administration with my principal certification. I am entering year 7 at Global Academies. I just want to give a disclaimer before we continue. I'm going to say a lot of things. I am not an expert. I am very experienced, however. The funny thing is we're all experienced through being a student ourselves, going to college and different things like that, just being educators. So we all have know-how. So I just want you today just to consider the best practices for your school and all of your stakeholders, and just consider the context for fit and appropriateness. And throughout this whole webinar, I just always want you to ask, who are you as a school? Who are my stakeholders? Who am I serving? So anything that comes up, say, okay, how does that apply to my particular school, my particular company? Global Academies, who are we? We're actually a network support team. Currently, right now, we support 2 schools. Those 2 schools are located in West Philadelphia. They are Global Leadership Academy West and Global Leadership Academy Southwest. Learning at GLA, as you can see, is hands-on and active. We try to keep our lectures to a minimum, and our student performance is based on our multi-tiered support systems, which we try our best to never over-identify students. We try to look at the student as a whole, and we try to figure out how to best meet the needs of individual students. We are also a model school, and we pour resources and expertise to families that are neglected, but critical elements of student success, which includes parent involvement. We have a culture of high expectations, a relentless focus on attendance, evolved systems of student and parent support, social and cultural programming, and we always want to make our schools where scholars could come to achieve. And if you hear me say the word scholars throughout, that's what we call our students. We call them scholars. Scholars are responsible for their learning. So not in our place of work that is not used interchangeably. We call our scholars scholars, and if you use the word student, is not necessarily the most appropriate word where we work. However, when I'm talking to other people like I am right now, you'll hear me interchangeably use the word. So when we say scholar, we mean student and vice versa. So, but what makes us us? I just now said who Global Academies was, but that's not who really we are. So the other day, I asked my daughter, I said, her name is Deja. That's my oldest daughter. She's 19. And I said, Deja, if you had to say, if we were to open up a Global Academy school right now, what are some things that are non-negotiables? Like, we're opening up a school, we have Global Academies, this is who we are. And so this is what I want you to do when you are considering handling, observing, and implementing positive behaviors into your school. Always continually ask this question: what makes us us? So we have something called Jewel of the Month. So every single month, we celebrate our scholars and we use what we call a different jewel, but it's very purposeful. For instance, the jewel of December is caring. Well, we know in the month of December, we have different holidays where we give out gifts and things like that. So we use that as our jewel of the month, which is caring. In January, we have resiliency. Why is January resiliency? Well, we know a lot of times in December, we go home for winter break or we go home for the holidays and we come back to school. Teachers are needed that rest, but they still now have to have that January to June push, and they have to be resilient. We also had a fire in our school back in 2012 where the whole school burned down, and we literally didn't have a school building for 4 months. And we showed a lot of resiliency throughout that month. And it happened on January 14, 2012. So we were very resilient during that era. February is diversity because Black History Month, and Women's History Month is in March, which is virtuosity and things like that. So all of our jewels, each and every month, we celebrate and we actually identify a characteristic throughout that month that we apply to not only our scholars, our family, and our curriculum. So we have Jewel of the Month. Both schools are located in West Philadelphia. We have small learning communities. We actually have 3 communities at our Global Academy schools right now. Our K-2 population is called the Rising Stars population. Our 3 to 6 population is called the Legendary Leaders. And grade 7 through 8 is called the Collegiate Academy. We call our scholars kings and queens. We always want them to affirm themselves. We always want them to know that they are great, that they are leaders, that they were put on this earth for a purpose. So we always address them as kings and queens. So we would literally say, good morning, queen, good morning, king. Like I said, we call our student scholars. We have something in the morning that's called Harambe. Harambe is an old African tradition that was actually, there's an argument here, but it was borrowed from the Dutch. And the Dutch would go to Harambe, which was like a market, a center place where everybody would meet and everybody would just get to know each other and commune together. But in African tribes, Harambe, they had a circle, and the African king or the elder would come out in the middle, and he would get everybody's attention, and they would talk about the comings and goings of the day. So during our Harambe, we do it first thing in the morning, every single morning. We do the Pledge of Allegiance. We say our school pledges. We talk about announcements. We actually recognize people if they've shown greatness throughout the week. If somebody got an A on the test, we say, hey, I want to recognize Judy. She got an A on her spelling test yesterday. So we do that during this particular time. And we also give the teachers and the students, their scholars, their next steps throughout the day. So that's something we do every single day. And I'll add one more thing. We have 1,300 children between both schools. We have 600 at one location and 700 at another. The Sankofa fact of the day is also discussed during Harambe. We believe that Sankofa means to reach back to move forward. So we want to learn from the history that came before us. So if Malcolm X did something, if Marcus Garvey did something, if Adolf Hitler did something, we want to learn from the history and learn from the pitfalls or maybe even the positivity of the past, so we can then take that information, make it part of our essence, and move forward and learn from it and apply it to things that we do in the future. And our tagline is preparing future leaders of the world. And last but not least, we have something what we call excursions. Our excursions are very purposeful. Every single year, our sixth graders, they follow the trek of Dr. Martin Luther King. So they go to Atlanta, well, actually they go to Washington, D.C., where his statue is. They go to Atlanta, where his childhood was. Then they go to Alabama. They go to Selma, the Edmund Pettus Bridge for voting rights. They go to Montgomery, Alabama for the bus boycott. And they also go to Birmingham, Alabama, where he lived and he became a preacher. And last but not least, the trip is actually finished in Memphis, where unfortunately he was assassinated. So that's in sixth grade. In seventh grade, they follow the trek of Harriet Tubman. And in eighth grade, they follow the trek of the transatlantic slave trade and they go to an island in the Caribbean and things like that. So yes, it sounds like great places to go, but it is a learning event. And so just to show you some pictures of some of the places we go, this is us in Washington, D.C. This is us actually in Detroit when we're coming back from Canada, the Underground Railroad. This is us in Atlanta. They're actually assembly sitting at the lunch counter where a lot of Black people face violence. This is us at Clark Atlanta University. We visit different universities like Howard, Clark Atlanta, Bowie State. This is at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis. This is actually a great shot. This is a shot. The top shot is when Dr. King was looking out his window. The bottom shot is what James Earl Ray, who shot Dr. King, that was his view. And this is in Cincinnati, where we visit the African American Museum, and that's our last stop on the trail. And this is recently, after COVID, this was our first excursion in 3 years where we got a chance to go to New York City, and we actually got a chance to take in a musical play. But we don't just stop there. This is Niagara Falls, Canada. This is actually Buxton, Canada. This is an old schoolhouse for former slave children. This is the Bahamas. This is Jamaica. This is Haiti. This is Kenya. And this is China. So those are the different places where our scholars actually go. So now that we said all that, you have a picture of who we are as a school. We haven't really talked about behavior. We haven't talked about any of those things, but we know these are the things that we stand upon. So these are our foundational pillars. As you can see, we stand upon 7 pillars. The first one is climate, culture, and safety. Second one is scholar-centered decision-making. Third one is cultural relevant exposure. Fourth one is academic rigor. The fifth one is building relationships. The sixth one is sustainable systems. And last but not least, the seventh one, which is at the bottom, is consistent and intentional reflection. These are what we stand upon at our schools. There are 3 in particular that we're really going to harp on and talk about today. So the first one is building relationships. The second one is culture, climate, and safety. And the third one is consistent and intentional reflection. When we build relationships, we feel as though at Global Academies, we can't do anything without building relationships. And that includes all of our stakeholders. That includes our parents. That includes the administrators. That includes the teachers. That includes any working staff. That includes community members, which includes clergymen, which includes politicians. Any and everything that we do, we want to build a relationship. We feel as though, let's just say I'm a teacher at a Global Academy school. We cannot effectively teach a scholar the way we want to teach a scholar if we don't build a relationship with that particular person. So as you can see, it begins with the parents. It begins with community meetings before the school even opens up. We literally have meetings before the school opens up, and we allow our community to come ask us any question that they want. We've actually done community walks around our school where we actually marched around and just let everybody know, hey, school's about to start. You know, you have any questions, come up to the school. Matter of fact, you can ask us these questions right now. So it's part of everything that we do with building relationships. The next one is culture, climate, and safety. I say this all the time. As a dad myself, when I send my child to school, I have a clear expectation that my child is going to come home the same way I sent them to school. So this is very purposeful in what we do at Global Academies. So we try to establish clear and effective positive behavior and intervention systems. Our dorms are taught right away. For instance, I said that one of our academies was the Collegiate Academy. Well, the first 3 days of school, our scholars actually go through what we call Collegiate 101. Even though that scholar might have been already in the academy the year before, there are certain things that they have to have almost like a refresher course. So the same thing, if you're going to college, you have to take University 101 and they say, hey, this is what this college does. These are our systems. Hey, here's where you go eat lunch. Here's where you go get your coffee. Here's where you go buy your books. We actually do the same thing with our scholars in all 3 academies each and every year, and is reiterated throughout the school year. So you're always going to have meetings. You're always going to revisit if something's not working. Our scholars are actually part of this decision-making process, and they will tell us, hey, Mr. Kennedy, I don't think this is working. Maybe we should try this. And we literally have community meetings where these things are discussed. But any and every decision that we make is always around the safety of our scholars and the safety of our staff members. So, and as you can see, if you walk through our schools, we constantly have public reflections of students' academic, behavioral, and character achievements. I feel as though our schools are literally like living museums. We find any and every way to always celebrate our scholars. And you can see that throughout our walls. You can see that throughout our classrooms. It is stressed by administration that this will take place. I feel as though they're human beings in general. They love to be celebrated. So if you walk in, whether you're in 8th grade or whether you're in 1st grade, if you have something that represents you, if you have something that's celebrating you, it's actually going to motivate you and actually make you feel better, and make you feel appreciated. So that's something that we're real purposeful about. The last pillar that we have to have before we begin a behavioral system is consistent and intentional reflection. Anything you do, after you apply it, after you plan, after you implement it, you always have to evaluate. You always have to come back to. You always have to say, hey, did this work? Why is it working? Hey, if this doesn't work, what can we do to make it better? What are our next steps? So we have different things that allow us to consistently and intentionally reflect. And those are PBIS team and data meetings, our MTSS meetings. We have school-wide meetings with all the staff members. And when I say all the staff members, the nurses, if you want to call somebody a secretary or the maintenance, they are all in this school-wide staff meetings, because any and everything that we do inside of our school walls affects everyone. We also have community meetings. We actually allow the neighborhoods to come into our buildings and have town halls. We have classroom meetings with the teacher in their classrooms. And if something happens in the class, we have something called restorative circles. So let's just say 2 individuals had an argument the day before. We'll actually have a meeting and we'll talk about, hey, what could we have done differently? What are some things that happen? What will we do next time? And different things like that. So a lot of our programs are also created as a group, as previously stated, and that includes our scholars. So now that we know all that and we stand up on the pillars and we know who we are as a school, we ask ourselves, okay, what do we do with all that information? You know, what's next? So what's next is we want to have a mindset. We want to continue to build high expectations for behavior. We can have all these great things inside of our school walls, but if we don't have expectations for positive behavior, you're not going to get everybody perfect. You're not going to get everybody to be angels and do what they want to do. As a matter of fact, to be honest with you, that doesn't make a school colorful if everybody's just walking around and almost performing the way that an adult wants them to perform, so to speak. But you always want to build towards that. So any and everything that you do, you always want to have high expectations. No, I expect you to. So this is for our scholars. The reason why schools are built for children to learn. So everything we do, even though we always considering stakeholders, we're considering stakeholders and how those stakeholders are affecting our children, how those stakeholders have relationships with our children. So when we have those high expectations, we want to have high expectations for our scholars. So we have to like sift through some of those myths. What are those myths that come up all the time as to why children cannot behave? And you might have had conversations with people all the time if somebody's being quote unquote bad, and they always say, well, you know, they got emotional problems, they got problems at home. Oh, it's the parents' fault. You know, this child can't behave because look where they live, look where they come from. Oh yeah, well, you know, they don't have the resources everybody else have. So because they come from a poor house, that's why they're misbehaving. Oh, they have an IEP. Well, you know how scholars with IEPs, they they're just bad. They can't learn and everything like that. So these are some myths that we just have to swim through a lot of times. And it's funny, these myths, somebody would deny that these are myths. But if you really go to a teacher's lounge sometimes and actually listen to people talk, even parents talk across the board, if you go on social media, these are some of the things that people are saying as to what's wrong with our schools today. So what we want to try to do with Global Academies, we just want to enlighten people. We always want people to learn. We always want them to be in a space to grasp and grasp a level of understanding of how behaviors work. And you might have heard this before. Hey, you teach them math, you teach them English, you teach them science. Well, guess what? You have to teach behaviors too. So what do? We have to make it easier for our scholars to behave, put them in a position to be successful. We have to make it worthwhile for our scholars to behave. Whether we like it or not, sometimes they have to be motivated. Sometimes you have to give a scholar a sticker. Sometimes you have to give them a pencil to behave. There are some people that say, why are we giving scholars things that they should be doing anyway? That's just not how it works. It really isn't. But here's the key factor. You have to make it unpleasant for them to not misbehave. If they're in a situation and they're not necessarily following the norms, following the rules, what are the consequences look like? How do the rest of the other scholars feel? What are some things that, is going to affect them to make them uncomfortable to say, okay, this is not a space that I really want to be in right now. So those are some things that we as a school always consider when we're establishing our norms. So we have two things. We want people to always know, our scholars to always know, our teachers to always know, number one, you are responsible for what happens in the classroom. You can't point fingers, you can't say it's somebody else. You have the right to talking to our teachers, administer consequences. That you have classroom management inside your classroom. But we always want our teachers to positively reinforce those behaviors. We want teachers to acknowledge negative behaviors. We really do, because we look at those as learning tools. We look at those as teachable moments. And we want teachers to acknowledge all students. I don't know if anybody on this webinar right now has been responsible, but sometimes you find yourself only teaching the children that are doing the right thing. Sometimes to get through the day, if a child is off task, if a student is not doing what they're supposed to do, as a coping mechanism, you want to ignore. You don't want to address, because of some of the things that may happen, the conflict that may happen if you address these negative behaviors. So a lot of times we say, you know what, I'm not dealing with this today. But we want to continue to acknowledge all students and let all students that they are part of the cohesiveness of the school culture. Number two, we want our teachers to know the most effective teachers assert their authority with students in a firm and positive manner. Nobody really likes people that yell at children, that call them out their name and everything like that. You always want to affirm children. You always want to affirm their behavior, but you have to stand firm in those expectations. Your interactions with your scholars always have to be well considered and predetermined. And here's the hard part. The hard part is, if you have 30 students, 25 students, 20 students in your class, you should already know that you cannot treat every single scholar the same. So when you're considering behaviors, yes, you want to consider Jennifer's temperament. You also want to consider, hey, Bobby keeps getting up out of his seat. What are some ways that I can alleviate and lessen that particular behavior? So these are things that you should already understand as an educator, even before you are actually building those, after you build a relationship with the scholars, you should already understand and know that these behaviors may occur. So you always want to consider everything. You always want to predetermine. You always want to make it purposeful. You always want to make your expectations known. And last but not least, you want to follow through on the consequences. So if you say, hey, if this behavior continues, you are going to have to go to the quiet table and you are going to have to write a short essay on this particular behavior. Let's just say that's your consequence for this scholar performing this behavior. The scholar performed the behavior one more time. Well, at that point, you now can't say, oh, okay, I forgive you. No, you have to give expectations. You have to provide the reasons for it, and you have to follow through.
Hey, Paul.
Yes.
Real quick, we had a question in the chat from Denise. She says she loves the focus on collaboration in the field, and she wants to know on the 6 foundational pillars, or it was 7, right?
7. Mm-hmm.
7. Were those created from the beginning, like when you guys opened, or was that a collaborative thing after you opened with staff, even with students and family feedback?
So I was hired in 2015, 2016, I was hired. Those pillars existed since 2006. Just to give you a little history of our school used to be called something different from 2001 to 2005. Our current CEO, her name is Dr. Naomi Johnson Booker. Her and her team came in 2006, and they basically revamped the school. She interviewed every single person. She rehired some people, but in doing that, these are some things that was developed when the school first became Global Leadership Academy back in 2006. So those particular 7 pillars are the 7 pillars for which we stand on. And you'll hear all the time. Let's just say I have a program, and I think it's the greatest program ever. The principal might say, "Hey, Mr. Kennedy, is that program sustainable?" You know, she might sit there and say, "Hey, does that have enough number 4? Does that have enough academic rigor?" So not only are these the pillars we stand on, it's actually part of our language, but it did originate in 2006 when we first opened up, and every single Global Leadership Academy school that will open up in perpetuity will have these particular 7 columns for which we stand on.
I love that. So it almost even can become like a decision-making tool. Like, how does this decision impact our pillars? I like that a lot.
All the time. And we always talk about it. And we don't just wait till the end of the year to discuss it. We're always revisiting. We have, for instance, every single Wednesday, our small learning communities, they have an academy leader, and we actually have community meetings every single Wednesday. And these are some of the things that we talk about as far as having stuff that is culturally relevant, sustainable systems. How do we build relationships? Is this showing consistent reflection? Is it safe for scholars to do this particular activity? So the language is actually part of our culture.
And Paul, before I let you go on, I had one more note on the pillars. One of them was scholar-centered decision making.
Yes.
How do you guys implement that in your programming? I mean, just real briefly.
Well, like I said, almost any and everything, the scholars have a say. They really do. So a teacher would literally ask students, "Hey, what do you want to learn? How do you want to learn it?" Because the teacher is trying to meet scholars where they are. As you know, for instance, I'll just give a big example: the advent of social media. So with TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and all those different things, 3 years ago, those were not apparent in our curriculum and our lesson planning. But the teachers actually meeting the scholars where they are, those things are almost mandatory now, because that's just part of their life. When I first became a teacher, a big tool was music. And that actually came from students saying, "Hey, Mr. Kennedy, can you liven up this class? Can you do this? Can you do that?" A lot of times when you're teaching a lesson, when it's scholar-centered, we actually have choice boards. We actually have, "Hey, you have to do a report on, Donald Trump," just using his name. "You have to do a report on Donald Trump," and they will give them different ideas on how they can do a report. "Hey, you can draw a picture. You can do an essay. You can do an outline, but the outline has to have these particular things. You can role play. You can reenact a famous situation that he was involved in, but it's on a choice board, and a scholar has the choice to pick." So most of our activities, most of our lessons, there's always like 3 different options of what they can do. They can make a song, they can make a rap about it and everything like that. But it's always calling them scholars and having scholars responsible for their learning. When I do activities, I put out a survey and I say, "Hey, we're about to do a live school party in February. Here are your 3 choices for the theme." And they vote on it. When we started up our school store, "Hey, what do y'all want to call y'all school store? Here are the nominated names. We need y'all to vote on it." And all of a sudden it was called the Gator Swamp or something like that. It's something like that. But the children picked the name. And so the great part about that is it allows them to take ownership. It allows them to be more responsible for their learning, for their activities. It allows them to know that their school is their school. It isn't just a shirt and tie, a suit just up there, just telling them do this, do that, do this. No, you're part of the collective. So that's something that we're always purposeful in our administration.
I love that. Any chance you can get to build ownership with students, I think it's a big deal. It's small school, big school, public school, private school, that's all helpful. One thing, like I wrote a note while you were doing that. You mentioned restorative circles. I'm going out on a limb. All of that student choice and student input, it probably makes that so much more effective when you can do it because they're used to having those conversations. Am I right on that?
You're right. And the great part about we call them almost lifers. For the most part, when you get to our school in kindergarten, unless your parents move, you're still going to be a member of our school 9 years later. So it is so part of their essence. Even when they leave us, part of my job is actually work with alumni. It's kind of weird to say we have an alumni program for, people that transition from 8th grade, but we really do. So even when you talk to them, whether they're in 9th grade, 10th grade, whether they're 25, 26 years old at this point, you can actually see they've had almost the same type of journey, and they have the same temperaments, and their language is almost the same, and the way they see the world is the same. And a lot of that is because how we apply our norms in our schools. So those restorative circles, I'm sure you can guess, they are not teacher run. They are scholar led, So it's almost like a peer mediation, but instead of having one person, you have the whole collective as part of the conversation.
Very cool. And like for something like that to be real effective, I think it's got to be like part of your norms and culture, like you were saying. Thank you for digging a little deeper on that.
You're welcome. And the slide says, let's dig a little deeper. So as you can see, up until this point, we're trying to give our stakeholders tools to be effective. And we're trying to give our stakeholders tools to basically teach our children. And if you really see, I really haven't mentioned curriculum that much. Jordan just now asked me to give an example. That was one of the first times. As you can see, a lot of this is classroom management, and a lot of this is culture and climate, community involvement, and different things like that. And we didn't even get to the X's and O's of actually teaching, because these are the particular things that I personally think is very, very important to put children in a space where they can have optimal learning. So we want you to remember, and I think I previously said this, but the same way that we hold high expectation for student achievement, we must hold high expectations for student behavior. We must hold high expectations for behavior in spite of the common misperceptions that I previously talked about the inevitability of behavior problems. Because no matter what you do, you're never going to have 100% of your scholars do everything they're supposed to do. So because we knew all that, we said, you know what? We don't actually have a structure for these things. We literally said this. These are things that we've been doing, like I said, Jordan, since we opened up the school in 2006, but we never had a structure. So in the year of 2019, we decided to adopt PBIS. As you can see, it's positive behavior intervention and supports. And our PBIS is affectionately known as global greatness. We wanted to put words in that we always use. So you'll always hear us say, you are great, you are great. You're standing in your greatness, you're uplifting greatness. And to have the double consonant title, it just flowed. And we decided in 2019 to call our PBIS Global Greatness. So our Global Greatness Initiative is proactive and intentional structuring of our learning environments. So that's what we wanted. We just wanted our scholars to be in a space where they always knew what was expected of them, that they recognize they have the responsibility to behave positively. And we wanted them to know that there are rewards for positive behaviors and consequences for displaying what we would deem as negative behaviors or not performing to to what's expected of you as a scholar. So whether it's positive or negative, we want our scholars to always know that there are consequences for that. Positive consequences, negative consequences, but we always want them to have teachable moments. So we wanted them to have a structure and a framework. So this is our posters that we have throughout our school. This is from one of our schools called Global Leadership Academy Southwest. Our school, Global Leadership Academy West, has the same exact poster, however, it's different colors. So the one at West has a black background with gold letters, and the RRS is in the colors of black, yellow, and green. But leaders with integrity show responsibility, respect, and safety. I'll say it again. Leaders with integrity show responsibility, respect, and safety. So this is the tagline of our Global Greatness PBIS program. So just to let you know, I'm sure most of you know on here might be familiar, but if you're not, Positive Behavior Intervention Supports, affectionately known as PBIS, is an evidence-based framework for promoting positive school climate. It is not a packaged intervention that you can purchase. What I mean by that is what PBIS looks like at my school does not look the same as your school. We have different teachers, we have different parents, we have different students. Here's the thing, y'all know from me saying that I support and serve 2 schools. We try our best to make everything uniform across Global Academies. However, it's 2 different schools. So when we're having these conversations, where a lot of times in the conversation, we say, hey, what does this look like for Southwest? What does this look like for West? Even though it's under the same framework. So as you can see, it's a universal system of behavior support. By providing a system of behavior support to all scholars in the school, fewer scholars require more intensive individualized supports. So once again, even though we're supposed to have our behavior and our teaching scholar specific, we want to put ourselves in a position where 80 to 85% of our scholars are uniform as far as what the expectations and what the norms are. And it's rooted in the idea that scholars of all ages must be explicitly taught the behavior expectations of their school. So 2 examples that I normally give. This is an example of a bike. You have the bike frame, and the bike is quote unquote PBIS. So inside that framework, you have implementation, you have the principal, you have the school team, you have coaching, you have data, you have evidence-based interventions. And so another example that I normally give, imagine building a house or a building. The first thing you start with that building a house is the frame, the actual frame. Before you put the cement on, before you put the bricks on, before you put the stucco on, before you do any and everything, you have the frame. Then you add all those things. You add the wiring, you add the pipes for the plumbing. You know, later on, you add the flooring, you add the furniture, you add everything, which is now part of the framework. You can also take things away from that frame. You can also use things more in that framework than other things. So it is a framework. And so you can always add to it. Now, this past year, we were able to actually add these particular 5 things that's at the bottom to our framework. So because of everything that happened in the pandemic and everything, we wanted to make it more purposeful. So we actually added trauma-informed care education. So every single month, our teachers had a PD on trauma-informed care, which actually helped them with administering positive behaviors and with their instruction. We had the creation and implementation of our first tier 2 intervention. We had actually 2, check-in and check-out and breaks are better. You know, you have some scholars that need that extra intensive attention. So they have to have a mentor. They have to be put in a position where they actually can take a break. A lot of us don't even understand when you take a break, there's actually a process to taking a break. You know, when you tell a child to go get water, they're not just getting water. Think about it. They're upset. They're de-escalating. They're walking down the hallway. They're thinking about what they're doing. You know, they're actually drinking the water and they're still thinking about, hey, okay, before I go back in this class, I'm going to behave. Now they're walking back. They're taking deep breaths. They're figuring out, okay, when I go back in, this happened before. Now this is not going to happen now. It's a whole process, but we actually put them in a position where breaks are better to actually learn what they are going through that particular process. And remember, any and everything that we do as far as a tier 2 intervention, there's always an exit out strategy. Behavior reporting. First time that we utilized it with Fidelity, I would say. It's not the first time we use it. First time we utilize it with Fidelity. We applied live school with a purpose, almost the same thing. And what I mean by that is, when I was head of my academy, I was one of the few people that was using live school with Fidelity and really implementing to my academy. Last year was the first time that it was school-wide. So that was the great thing that we actually added to our framework this past year. And for the first time, we actually incorporated the social work team as part of the PBIS and MTSS teams. So that was actually 5 pluses that we were able to do this past year and add to our framework. And
Hey, Paul, real quick before you go on. Sorry, Paul, I didn't mean to cut you off. That piece on tier 2, I think that's a piece that a lot of schools, they kind of fail to systemize that. And what you were talking about, because you had 2 specific programs that you guys could get really good at. I think that's a big deal. That how did you guys go about choosing? Well, how'd you get there?
So the check in, check out, that was kind of me. And what I mean by that is, in my former location, I was actually the check in, check out coordinator. And so I implemented to a smaller level already in my academy, where I set up mentors throughout my academy. So when we selected certain scholars, we put them on check in, check out, and we just had them talk to their mentor at the beginning of the day. And we actually had them have a chart. So each period, 45 minutes, they would get a score of 0, 1 to 3. 3 met all my goals, 2 met some of them, 1 didn't really meet the requirements, 0 didn't meet any of them. And so we set up that they had to meet 80% of their goals. So if they had 8 periods throughout the day, they could get 3 points for each period. So that's 24 points. Let's just say they get 18 out of 24 points. Well, that's only 75%. So that means they didn't meet their goal. But after meeting their goal, after a 6-week period, we will revisit to see if this is an intervention that is still viable for this particular scholar, and then we will exit them out. So I was already doing that in my academy. When it was time for us to implement a tier 2 intervention, that was almost like perfect. It was almost like perfect. And the way we adapted or differentiated for the lower school, instead of giving points, we give smiley faces. We give a smiley face, we give a plain face, we give a frown face, and things like that. And yes, we do give a frown face, and yes, we do give zeros. We want the scholars to actually see, hey, in 5th period in Ms. Johnson's class, you didn't do what you were supposed to do. And we also want their parents to know, because their parents are a stakeholder. And be honest with you, we can't do nothing without parental support. We want their parents to know, hey, this particular child at 5th grade is having problems with Ms. Johnson's class. What can we do about this? So that was one intervention. The other one was breaks are better. It came up in a conversation with the PBIS team that check and check out wasn't going to work for everybody. And some scholars just needed a little break. Some scholars just needed hey, I need 5 minutes. Let me go sit over at this table and let me go color, or let me go read a book, or let me just go on the computer or anything like that. So we felt as though that there were some scholars that just needed that level of intervention. And we get them 2 a day. We get them 2 a day. And a lot of times, scholar-centered decision-making, they get to choose when they take their 2 breaks. They get to choose. So we give them passes and everything. So they give their teacher their first pass, and it says, hey, break number 1 on the pass. And then we give them their second pass. And so that's how it works. And once again, it's an exit strategy once again for that. So that's how that came about. And I can't wait for this year to start, because we started it in January of last year because we were still recouping from the pandemic. And so this year we're already established. We already have the foundation. The great part, we just had a conversation yesterday about what scholars are going to be chosen. And my thing was, okay, let's keep in mind what scholars can be chosen, but let's not choose any scholars, because scholars mature and change over the summer before they return to school in September. So that was the conversation we just had yesterday. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, that's a piece I think that a lot of schools kind of get hung up on, because they get to that point where they're implementing MTSS and they just that the plan there is less concrete, and kind of by nature of the situations too.
Right, exactly. So for global greatness, what steps did we take to make global greatness? Just yesterday, I met with my PBIS team, and we were just talking about all the great things that we have done, but it wasn't easy for us to get to this point. What we had to do, once again, it keeps coming up. Who are we as a school? So I just now alluded to the fact that we called it global greatness because we wanted to highlight who we are as a school. So the name, the tagline, Scholars with Integrity, we actually had a 2-day conversation of what do we want our scholars to do in this program? And it was so many words, so many names and everything. So we want them to be responsible. We want them to be respectful, and go back to that word. We want them to be safe. The poster design, we are called the Global Academy Gators. So that's why you see the alligator. His name is Globy, our mascot. So we wanted Globy to be highlighted throughout so the children can always identify with it. It's almost the measure of children can read before they actually can read. Like a one-year-old knows what the golden arches look like. They really do, which is a form of reading. So we want our scholars to know, hey, in this particular space at this particular time, I see Globy, and Globy's saying something. I don't know exactly what he's saying, but it's actually attracting my mind to it. But I know that this is a safe place in this particular part of the building. And we want to identify systems to document behaviors. Right now, for our Tier 1 behaviors, we have a system affectionately known as Live School for documenting Tier 1 behaviors, and level 2 and level 3 behaviors. We do have a tracking behavior system called Branching Minds. We actually use both systems when we're aggregating data throughout. It helps us immensely. For instance, if we see a spike in 5th grade behaviors, we can pinpoint what time the behaviors are taking place, where the behaviors are taking place, and everything like that. And we actually can look at those behaviors, and we can actually come up with different interventions to rectify those particular behaviors. Now, with Live School on an in class, let's just say it's a scholar getting up out of his seat. And let's just say there's a scholar that got 20 points for the day and another scholar that got 11 points for the day. You can actually ask, hey, why did this scholar get 11 points for the day? And a teacher might say, hey, if you look at the record, because they keep giving up out of their seat. One thing that we did do in Live School, we stopped giving negative points. Because of once again, meeting our students where they are, there were too many students that became very temperamental when they would hear that womp 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 sound, or they would see that red come up. But we felt as though that when they're bringing home their checks to their parents, that their parents have to have the whole story. So we are still documenting quote unquote negative behaviors, but the scholars are not losing money for it. So that was one thing that we decided last school year. So the first thing we did was create an implementation team. We did that. Second thing we did was we designed a matrix to design expected behaviors in specific areas of the school. As you can see on here, the different areas are dismissal space, Harambe, hallways, bathroom, technology. As you can see, we added virtual. This was not here 3 years ago. We actually added it because we do have expectations when the scholars are learning on the computer that they're supposed to model and they're supposed to follow. Other areas that are not highlighted are the cafe, the schoolyard, the auditorium, bus, and the community. And as you can see on this example, actually, this is actually the actual document, but we list what the expected behaviors are for responsibility. Let's just take the bathroom. We actually list the behaviors where they are shown respect when they are using the bathroom facility, and we actually show how they are being safe when they are using the bathroom facility. Now, we actually have posters in the bathroom that states all these things. So if a scholar is ever confused, they actually have the information right at their disposal. So these matrices are actually hung up in different parts of the school. So people can always read it, can always refresh, and they can always learn from it. Like I said, this is foundational. This is something that all we have to do is revisit and tweak and say, hey, this is not working. Harambe was not there 3 years ago. A teacher called me up and said, Mr. Kennedy, I think we need a slot for Harambe because the scholars are doing what they're supposed to do during Harambe. And he also said they should receive a point for doing what they're supposed to be doing during Harambe. So I took this back to the PBIS team, and we actually made that update. We have lesson plans for every single place in the building. This is our auditorium norms. When we're having our restorative circles or our morning meetings, the teacher can revisit, and they have these in a handbook, and it's right at their disposal. Now, teachers are teachers. A lot of these lesson plans, they're just, foundational. They're just quote unquote frameworks for them. So when they're looking at them and everything, they could say, hey, how can I make this lesson, align this with my class or align this with what I'm teaching in class? So we're just basically giving them the template, and all they're doing is following the template. We also ask our teachers when they're teaching these lesson plans sometimes to actually go to the place in the building where they actually want to use this particular lesson plan. So if they're teaching the auditorium norms, we actually request that the teachers transition their children to the auditorium to teach this particular lesson, so the students can actually see the space that they're supposed to be learning about. Next, after we did that, we created an acknowledgement board. So this is our acknowledgement matrix. I'm just going to give an example. So the target population is all scholars. What's the type of acknowledgement? Live school points. Well, how do you get the live school points? Following school-wide expectations. Who, where is it? Is given by all settings, by all staff. What is the frequency? Well, the frequency is every single day. And who's the coordinator named by the admin or the climate manager? So we have this throughout. We have about 4 pages of acknowledgement matrices. Some teachers do not have to follow this to a T. However, once again, it's providing them a template, but we try to just uniform everything across the school, across the board. So that's another thing that we had to do. And last but not least, we had to define behaviors. So we have each behavior that is a level 1 occurrence, a level 2 occurrence, and a level 3 occurrence. So once again, if you're going to branching minds and somebody in branching minds, and you make it a level 2 occurrence because somebody is eating in your class, we might sit there and tell a teacher like, hey, we understand how it could be affecting your learning. However, this is probably a level 1 occurrence, and you probably should document this in live school. So that's one thing. Sometimes we get pushed back, most of the time we don't. And so with the behaviors, however, we just always want the teachers to know that it should always be restorative, should always shift the mindset. The consequences should be logical. For instance, if a scholar gets upset and they break a pencil, then they should replace that pencil. If they have to take a break, whether there's loss of privileges, but the consequence should match whatever behavior that the scholar actually performs. So after we learn all that, we now are ready to take over the world. Not quite, just a little pause. We're not ready to take over the world, and here's why. You heard me talk about consistent and intentional reflection. Well, how are we going to do all these things unless we don't develop a committee to actually talk about the different things that are happening in the school throughout the school year? So what you have to do, you have to have a PBIS data implementation teams and an MTSS committee. Now, the data team looks at the data, aggregates the data, say these are the trends that are happening. The implementation team takes that data, discusses it, and talks about the different interventions that are going to be applied and assessed throughout the school. So their jobs, they aggregate the data, discuss behavioral trends, suggest specific interventions for specific scholars. That's in these particular meetings is how we actually suggest if a child might be suggested for check in, check out, or breaks or better. Implement interventions that come from the data, suggest ways to complement identified expected behaviors. So that means right there, what are ways that we can raise behavior? And we sit there and say, okay, we're having a problem transitioning from the lunchroom back to classroom after lunch. That's when a lot of scholars are receiving negative consequences, or that's the trend where, the documentation happened or altercations are happening during that time. But what are ways that we can motivate scholars to actually alleviate that particular behavior? Well, we might say to a whole class, okay, 5th grade, we see that we're having trouble transitioning from the lunchroom. If we do this correctly today, everybody gets a live school point. right there, that gives them ownership, that makes them responsible. And then we might even put almost like a competition thing. Let's see if we could transition back, if room 201 can transition better than room 202. If you transition better than room 202, you get 5 bonus points, something like that. We also hold the scholars responsible for each other. Hey, we're playing baseball today. We're all in this together. We're supposed to transition appropriately. If we have 3 of your classmates that do not transition appropriately, I apologize, but I cannot give you a live school point at this particular time. So now you have the scholar saying, hey, do the right thing. Do what you're supposed to do. Do what you're supposed to do. So these are different ways that we try to come up with in these meetings to actually motivate the scholars to actually perform the expected behaviors. We have turnaround trainings to the small learning communities that the team actually performs. So we want somebody from each team, from each academy, so that way they can learn everything in these trainings and then go back and tell their staff members, to tell their coworkers. We're continuing support for staff members. If they sit there and say, hey, if they find somebody on the PBIS team, hey, I need a classroom intervention to get my kids to learn, but I want to come up with a contest. There might be somebody on the PBS team, because we already discussed it, that can tell them, hey, on Friday, try this, on try that. And we just want them to constantly be torchbearers and champions throughout. So we have all that we're about to close down. Just wanted to show you some different things that we have going on throughout our school. This was PSSA week. So we had Tuesday, we had Crazy Sock Day, we had Crazy Hat Day, we had Dress Down Day, we had Crazy Twin Day. Here's Crazy Twin Day. For the first time ever, we had Twin Day, but we had it specifically and purposely on February 22nd, 2022. This will never happen again. So we wanted to take advantage of it. Right here, we had Book Day. You dress up as your favorite book character and everything. We had Pie Day. A lot of schools do that, where they have Pie Day. We have scholars who amassed enough live school points that they were able to go on a field trip, and they were able to take care of the beautiful Belmont Mansion in Philadelphia. 100 Steps for Harriet. It was Harriet Tubman's 100th birthday. We had the scholars walk around school, and they had to accumulate 200 steps. If they completed this, they got bonus live school points. And these were at our ceremony, where these were the star students who amassed the most live school points for the month. So those are different things that we did. So what our meetings allow us to do, what our framework allows us to do, what establishing our foundation allows us to do, it allows us to do all these particular things with fidelity. It really does. And we don't really have to talk about, we do reiterate, but for the most part, it becomes the norm. The children now have an expectation that we're going to be doing fun things throughout this, like this throughout the school year. It's an expectation. And they want to earn their particular live school points, and they want to learn their tickets and everything else that the teacher has to offer to participate in these particular things. As you can see, this is our jewel assembly. They had to wear pink. Each one of our jewels is a color. So diversity, which is the month of February, at the jewel assembly. This is the assembly where we also give out the live school awards, and we give out different awards for Scholar of the Month, for Student of the Month, the student that showed diversity the best, the student that, was the best helper, the best volunteer of the month. We actually have an assembly month in and month out where these things are celebrated, but we do all of these things under the Global Greatness moniker. And I just wanted to show this picture because this was actually our Jewel of the Month assembly. But as you can see, you see where it was. It was virtual. So just because we were virtual did not stop us from doing everything that we do. And I just also want to add, many of these things that I pointed out, we actually did these things virtual. So we actually had Twin Day virtually. We actually had Crazy Sock Day and Crazy Hat Day and Wear Your Best Football Jersey Day. And we did all those things virtually. We actually had a virtual day where the children had to design their room like they were going on a Caribbean island, and they had to, be in class in their island on that day and talk about the different things that was in their island. It was cute. And so it allows us to do everything. So all that being said, global greatness and everything that we do, our foundation and everything, it allows us to be one train. So on that train, we got Branch Your Minds. On that train, we have live school. On that train, we have our tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. On that train, we have our tier 1 interventions. And it allows us to just keep moving. So if you're in a branch your minds car, you might transition and go through the train and go in a live school car. You might have to go up to the tier 1 intervention car and talk about those particular things, but you can move from car to car because of our framework and because of our foundation and everything you do. And lastly, when you're putting all these things together, whether you're a dean, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a principal, you always want to continue to build relationships, and you always want to be yourself. So that's what you have to do. Just continue to be yourself. Just continue to do what you do. Continue to support scholars. Continue to support scholars with love and compassion, and your school will be successful.
Well, thank you so much for getting so many thanks in the chat. Just everyone really enjoying this presentation. I know I learned a lot, so I just really wanted to thank you for your time. I know we're at the hour mark, so I don't want to hold you. I'm sure you've got things to go and do, but just thank you to everyone who joined us. Thank you so much, Paul, for your time and going through that. I really want to rewatch it and just like take even more notes. I learned a ton, so thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. And thank you for inviting me. Like I said, I feel as though I've been a partner with Live School for 7 years now. There's been times in my school where, oh, by the way, they actually call me the Live School guy.
I love it.
Because I actually had to tell my deans yesterday, I said, y'all can do what I did. I literally used to go in Live School and just get lost in it and just make fake rosters and make fake scholars and everything to learn how to delete it, add it, and everything like that. And I always used to take a step back to say, okay, how can this program help my school and everything? And now I guess I'm in charge of it and everything. So
well, it's great having you as a partner. So thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who joined. We will be sending out the recording shortly, so look out for that so you can go back and rewatch it like I plan on doing.
Okay, thank you. Y'all have a blessed day. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everybody.